Hey guys, I'm Urizi. This story is all about what if Naruto was born before the Nine Tails attacked. Really, how much can small things affect the world? Little things like the color of someone's hair? Their mentor? Maybe, their date of birth? Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Chapter 13, New Freedom. A solid smack rang out through the compact training ground deep inside the Umbu headquarters. The sound was of one snake-masked Umbu's face firmly meeting the solid concrete of the floor. His opponent gave him a few seconds to regain his feet, but when the man just lay there motionless for a while, he grumbled and stalked off. The particular Umbu he had been beating down on quite thoroughly was still fairly green, only getting his mask less than a month ago. That was why he didn't know it was a particularly bad idea to challenge Tora to a spar on this particular day. Most knew today is the anniversary of the Uchiha clan massacre by Itachi Uchiha, leaving only 2 of his entire family alive. In the Umbu, however, it was known as one of the 2 days in the year when you did not approach Tora unless it was of vital importance. Hebai was now among the few that knew this sullen and exclusive fact, at least he would when he woke up 2 days later in the Umbu infirmary. Naruto breathed a deep sigh of relief as he walked out of the stifling air in the headquarters, lifting his mask up enough to pull in a lungful of the clean air. He disliked the building immensely, despite all the duties he had there due to his status as an Umbu captain. It had a much too utilitarian feel to it, all slate gray walls and simple desks for the various administration staff to work off of. Naruto had his own desk in the building, but it had remained untouched from the first day he had been made a captain, much preferring his private study in his home for that kind of work. Some of the tension he had been feeling today had been burnt off in his brief spar with the new Umbu who had been cocky enough to challenge the captain. However, he still felt slightly worked up. It couldn't be helped on a day that brought up so many bad memories. Pushing that to the side, he allowed a small grin to alight his face momentarily. Hopefully he could change today into a good day full of memories he wanted to remember. Behind him, a young frog-masked Umbu rushed up to him only to watch as his captain suddenly vanished in a flash of red light. Blinking in surprise at the sudden departure, he shook his head and stored away his question for later, turning back to tell his comrades what he had seen. There were a lot of rumors flying around about the captain, most of them revolving around the fact he never seemed to sleep. Patrols would leave for the night, passing him by as he trained, only to return when the sun rose to find him still working through various exercises or practicing jutsu. The young red-headed captain reappeared a few hundred feet away from the headquarters, his eyes glancing around at his surroundings before dropping down to street level. He laughed as the young girl he had landed beside jumped up in surprise, only to turn with a scolding look in her eye. Her irritation bled away as she looked at the blank tiger-themed Umbu mask staring at her dispassionately. "Hey Hana, you ready?" The young Inuzuka nodded uncertainly for a moment before her more natural nature kicked in, reaffirming her nod with more confidence. "Sure, everything's ready, but are you really sure I'm the right person for this?" Naruto chuckled, the sound getting slightly distorted through the mask as he placed a reassuring hand on the girl's shoulder. "We've already gone over this. If I didn't think you could do it, I wouldn't have asked." Hana nodded with her eyes slightly narrowed, but eventually relented as she allowed the taller redhead to lead her away. A 15-year-old Naruto walked up to the high walls of the Inuzuka compound, his face set into a look of determination. Today he was dressed in his father's old tracksuit. He wasn't sure why he had gone with the change all of a sudden, but lately he just felt he needed the extra comfort they provided. Anko was out on a mission, and that was perfect. He wanted to surprise her with this, so nothing could be revealed yet. It was strange to knock on a door for a change. Usually as an Umbu he had unrestricted access to everywhere in the village, and as a captain that included the clan compounds. However, today he was a civilian and had to wait a moment before the large doors opened up for him, a gruff but kindly-looking Inuzuka woman staring at him oddly. After a short but informative conversation, she gave him directions and he walked through the grounds of the dog-loving clan. He marveled as he saw dogs as large as wolves bounding through the open space, happily following their partners. He had worked with a fair few Inuzukas and always appreciated their natural instincts for companionship and loyalty. Their incredible heightened senses made them second only to the Hyuga for tracking missions. There was also the fact he respected them immensely for being in such good control of their more bestial nature. It was something he could empathize with. Arriving at the small, nondescript building towards the center of the compound, he quietly let himself in, giving a small nod to the receptionist as he walked on by. He knocked on another door, waiting a few moments before a soft voice called him in. He frowned a moment, hand on the doorknob. The voice sounded awfully familiar, yet he couldn't quite place it. The reason became evident as he walked in to catch a fleeting glimpse of long brown hair pulled up into a professional ponytail. Both teens stood there a moment, staring into the other's face with furrowed brows. Naruto. Realization dawned on the redhead's face as memories of the girl in his academy class rushed back. Hana? You're the Inuzuka head vet. The girl gained a slightly smug look as she put down the book she had been skimming through. That's right, so you're the guy that pulled up a sudden meeting out of the blue. What do you need, Naruto? The redhead shook his head for a moment before getting back on track, a more composed expression replacing the one of surprise. Yeah, I actually came here for a rather unusual request. He pulled out a small scroll, unfurling it before handing it over. Do you think you could manage this? Hana quickly looked over the contents of the scroll, her eyebrows rising further into her hairline with each line she read. I suppose something like this would be possible. A frown marred her otherwise flawless skin as she looked up from the scroll, breaking away from attempting to figure out some of the more complicated diagrams. Why me though? Surely this is something more suited to a medical ninja. Naruto shook his head quickly. He had expected the question. No, the chakra control needs to be perfect, there can be no mistakes. He sighed lightly, gaze drifting up to stare blankly at the cream wall behind her head. Honestly, if Tsunade of the Sun were in the village I would have gone to her, but as it is, you are probably the most qualified person in the village. The words sounded surprising even to him, especially as he remembered how she was in the academy. Luckily she seemed to have calmed down quite a bit since then. You're used to working with many different species of animals, that means your chakra is attuned to be ready for a sudden change dependent on circumstances. Medical ninja are too rigid in their practices, unable to properly adapt to the unexpected. He had already begun making his way out the room as he spoke. And trust me, if you choose to do this you'll be facing a lot of that. I'll understand if you don't, but I'll owe you a massive favor. Bye, Hana. The young Inuzuka vet watched the redhead leave with a small sigh. She wasn't ashamed to admit that in the academy she had a small crush on the boy, most of the girls did anyway. Now with time only adding height and muscle as well as shaping his face into something that would have most women drooling, she found herself reverting to that time. She looked down at the scroll in her hands again, her lips turning up into a smirk as she pondered what she could do with a favor from Naruto. Come on, Naruto, you know I hate things like this. Anko's rather loud pleas fell on deaf ears as Naruto continued to lead the purple-haired girl through the streets, blindfold securely around her eyes. Oh, I don't think you'll hate this. The girl huffed in annoyance, but inside she was actually rather anxious. It had been a long time since Naruto had seemed so. The only real word she could put to the feeling was excited, in that child wanting to keep a good surprise but bursting to tell kind of way. At least tell me where we're going. She heard a soft chuckling behind her, cursing this blindfold that had her so disoriented right now. At first she had tried to keep track of where they were going by the direction they took and the sounds that she could hear, however that didn't last long. She was much too impatient, and she was pretty certain Naruto had led her in a few circles to stop her doing just that. No need, we're here. Anko let out a relieved breath. The general sounds of the streets had died down when they had entered a building, and now she was practically dying to know what was going on. Finally, she quickly tugged the blue cloth from around her eyes, knowing that she must have looked like a fool being led through the village with it. However, as she looked around, confusion was the only expression on her face. They were in a medium-sized room comprised solely of slate-gray walls. There were no windows, and when Naruto closed the door behind him it seemed to melt away, seamlessly disappearing. Is this your idea of a surprise? Looks more like a prison cell to me. Naruto grinned, walking straight past the girl to stand at the center of the room. It is a prison cell. Anko's eye twitched as Naruto ignored her completely, instead focusing his attention on a ring of markings at the center of the room. Being around Naruto long enough, she knew they were seals, but she couldn't tell what they did in the slightest. Okay, let me rephrase that. Why the hell did you bring me to a prison cell? Naruto looked up, still grinning fondly. Nothing could have dampened his mood today. Because today I'm getting rid of your curse mark. Time seemed to grind to a halt for Anko as Naruto's words sunk in, her throat suddenly going dry as sandpaper. My mark. Naruto simply nodded happily, looking at the door like he was expecting somebody. Sure enough, a few moments later Hana walked through the door, carrying some equipment Anko didn't recognize. Sorry I'm late, I had to go and get some stuff, wasn't sure exactly what I would need. Anko just blinked at the new arrival, her mind still trying to wrap around the fact that tomorrow she might be walking around, free of the Denmark's influence. It's alright, we only got here a few minutes ago. Anko blinked again, gulping to wet her throat slightly. What the hell is going on here? Hana turned, not having noticed Anko in the corner as she walked in. Oh, hey Anko, long time no see. She smiled weakly, suddenly understanding a lot more of those diagrams all of a sudden seeing Anko's hand rest on top of her mark. She was about to continue nervously when Naruto placed a reassuring hand on Anko's shoulder. It's alright, she's here to help, we needed a medic for part of the sealing. Anko just blinked, her head still spinning madly from all the information she was suddenly getting. Yuri really going to remove the curse mark? Naruto nodded quickly, returning to observing the myriad of seals in concentric circles around the center of the room, at least he was until he was suddenly tackled to the floor by a flying purple glomp. After taking 5 minutes to prise Anko out of her bear-like hug and another 3 minutes to wait for Hana to stop laughing, Anko was finally lying down in the center of the seals. What is it? Naruto was looking down at her with a small blush across the bridge of his nose, nervously playing with the ink brush he had in one hand. He looked away shyly, mumbling out something that Anko couldn't quite hear, but had Hana, with her superior senses, blushing up a storm. What was that? Naruto's blush only increased as he turned around, still flipping the brush between his fingers. I need you to take your shirt off. His voice was barely a whisper, but Anko heard him loud and clear, her eyes going wide as her mouth twitched open. However, before Naruto could apologize, she was sitting up straight, struggling to pull her long navy t-shirt over her head. Naruto just watched in surprise, until he remembered what she was doing and looked away in embarrassment. After a few minutes, coughed loudly, forcing Naruto to look back around. Are you going to do something? It's freaking cold in here. Naruto was worried when he looked around, but thankfully Anko had her arms crossed over her chest, protecting her modesty. Of course that didn't stop Naruto taking a small glance anyway, he was still a teenager. Right. And like a switch had been thrown, all the embarrassment and nerves were gone from the redhead, replaced by a much more professional and concentrated expression. He carefully pricked her thumb, letting a few drops of her blood drip into an ink container he had brought. Next he delicately and slowly began to trace out numerous kanji and seals across her upper body, centered around the mark on her shoulder, but never touching it. Occasionally Naruto would have to stop, either to carefully push chakra into the array he was constructing or to wait for Anko to stop giggling as the ticklish brush moved over her sensitive skin. All right. Anko looked up in shock, careful not to move too much like she had been instructed. She may have been naturally energetic, but even she wasn't going to sabotage her only chance at freedom. That's it. Naruto had to refrain from chuckling as he shook his head slowly. No, that's just the sealing done, next we have to actually activate it. Anko just stared at him for a moment with unblinking eyes, straining to stay lying down at that moment. Well, get on with it then. Naruto grimaced as he looked away, making it seem like he was double-checking the seals even though he had already checked them at least 5 times before even bringing Anko in. It's going to hurt. Anko's eyes narrowed, she found his concern for her touching, but right now she couldn't care less what he thought. I don't care, just get this damn mark off of me. Naruto sighed wearily before looking back round, their eyes meeting for a moment as light caramel looked into deep purple. He gave a curt nod and motioned for Hana to come closer. They shared a wordless conversation as Hana's palm began to glow green. All right, here goes nothing. With a deep breath, Naruto began to channel chakra into his hand until it erupted in blue flame like his own torch. Then, still holding that breath, he carefully moved his hand over the seal, trying not to pay too much attention whenever Anko flinched at the heat radiating from his palm. With one last bated breath, his glowing hand hovered over the Mitsubishi before he slammed it down roughly, twisting to the left. Uzumaki sealing style, Juinjutsu release. Anko immediately screamed out in pain as the mark began to pulse a dangerous orange. However, when it tried to expand outwards, the ceiling array Naruto had drawn began to collapse on it, spiraling in the direction Naruto twisted his hand, condensing first around the mark before slowly melding with it. Anko's pained breaths grew shallower the more the mark was subsumed by the newer seal. Even so, Naruto's concentration never wavered, as did Hana's. A constant flow of chakra, both directive and healing, entered her system, fighting the curse mark while wiping its existence out of her body. Suddenly Anko's screams started anew, her body arching up in uncontrollable pain as the mark burned a deep and sickly orange, pulsing dangerously. Naruto's hand began to lightly shake as he felt it fighting him, pushing back on his seal like a snake backed into a corner. He grunted in concentration, forcing more of his chakra in to suppress it, but it fought back just as ferociously, parts of the seal entering it also beginning to turn a dark orange. Damn it! Naruto's hand was shaking much more uncontrollably now, his connection to Anko strenuous at best. Quickly as he could, he channeled a small amount of chakra into his right hand, his index finger lighting up in the same blue flame. In practiced motions he began to draw directly into the air, a small wavering line of blue light following in the wake of his finger. When he was done, he seemingly grabbed the floating mess of kanji and intricate lines out of the air, slamming it down onto a nearby scroll where it imprinted onto the paper line a burn. Just as swiftly he repeated the process, drawing a thin line between the new scroll and the curse mark. The effect was immediate, the seal stopped fighting back as all the sickly orange light began to seep out, traveling up the faint blue line in the air before amassing in the scroll. Once again Anko's screams died down into a muted whimper, her eyes however were wide open, staring straight up at the ceiling. Soon enough though her eyelids began to droop as a soft, soothing sensation overtook her entire body like a balm to her aching form. A few minutes later, although it seemed significantly longer, all of the orange light had been transferred to the scroll and Naruto was finally able to pull his hand away. He winced as he felt the chakra burns on his palm, knowing it was a small sacrifice in the long run. His hand would be working again by tomorrow as it always was. Hana took that as her cue to pull her own hand away, but not before quickly running a small diagnostic sweep across the unconscious girl's body. Naruto didn't get to ask her what she found as she gave him a small smile before passing out from chakra exhaustion. Anko groggily blinked her eyes open, groaning in annoyance as light streaming through the partially opened curtains hit her in the eyes like a mallet. In response she flipped over. Unfortunately there was something resting on the side of her bed that she managed to send crashing to the floor. A loud grunt of pain was swiftly ignored as Anko tried to stretch out the morning, basking in the strange, almost unsettling peace that she had this morning. Suddenly and without warning she shot up into a sitting position, her eyes opened wide as she realized she couldn't remember what happened last night. That alone was strange. Normally her ever-present nightmares were incredibly vivid and she would remember them long into the morning before suppressing them with the rest of her pained experiences. Suddenly a flashback to unbearable pain crossed her mind, quickly replaced by two orbs of purple filled with caring and concern. She blinked as she realized they weren't in her head and there were really two eyes looking into her own. AHH. She flew backwards in shock, crashing her head painfully into the headboard before letting it droop forward with a pained moan. Anko, are you okay? She looked up blearily, looking at Naruto properly and realized he was probably the thing she displaced earlier. Naruto, what's going on? What did I drink last night? A warm expression overcame Naruto's features as he settled back down on the corner of her bed. You don't remember? Anko shook her head with a small frown before suddenly image assaulted her mind, of seals, and pain and a desperate voice crying out in agony that sounded familiar, and loathed. She gripped her head in concentration before suddenly looking up with widened eyes, her hand grasping the spot over her neck. She couldn't believe it, there was no constant dull ache, no throb of pain when she thought about him, and the slight whispering that was so quiet she almost couldn't hear it was gone. Anticipating this, Naruto quickly handed her a small hand mirror which she gladly accepted to look at her shoulder. With no small amount of awe in her eyes she lightly traced the slightly lightened skin where the Mitsutum that had haunted her waking life since that day had been. All there was now was a patch of slightly lighter skin in the same vague shape, but even that would fade in time. For the first time in 3 years, she was completely free of him. Naruto didn't know what hit him as Anko suddenly launched herself off the bed, wrapping her arms around his neck and tackling him to the ground. She was laughing, tears streaming from her eyes out of happiness as she refused to let Naruto go. In turn the redhead accepted it, a warm smile on his face as he also wrapped his arms around the sniffling girl. Finally, after a warm and comforting moment for the both of them, Anko sat up, wiping away the last of her tears with the back of her hand. "Thank you, Naruto." The Namikaze went to reply as he turned his head only to spot the compromising position they were both in. Anko was straddling his waist, supporting her body with hands either side of his head as she looked down on him, a lilting smile on her still slightly tired face. At that moment Anko seemed to realize her position as well, blinking once in surprise as she looked down, their eyes connecting. It was like some strange attractive force that neither really tried to fight against as Anko's face slowly moved down as Naruto leaned up. Neither blinked, too lost in the other's eyes to want to tear their gaze away for even a moment. Naruto felt a heat rush through his chest, warming his body as he saw Anko nervously wet her lips, their faces only inches apart. He could feel her slightly minty breath tickle his neck and the bangs on either side of her face lightly brush his skin. "Hey Naruto, did you want me to?" Both teens suddenly shot around so fast they swore they got whiplash. Hannah was standing in the doorway holding a small glass of water, her eyes wide as she stared at the scene before a grin broke out over her face. "Oh, I didn't realize I was interrupting." She giggled lightly as she backed out the door, enjoying the bright red complexions the two shinobi had gained. "As you were." Anko scowled in her direction before a light cough caught her attention. Naruto was nervously looking to his left, a light smatter of red across the bridge of his nose as Anko realized she was still on top of him. In her own flash of purple she was standing up, gently rubbing the back of her head in embarrassment, also unable to meet his gaze. "Oh right, sorry." Naruto quickly turned, his hands out in front of him waving almost frantically. No. I mean, it was me and, He let his hands fall limply to his sides as his head drooped pathetically, almost comically if the two weren't so incredibly nervous and confused right now. Suddenly he felt a hand lightly tug on his chin, pulling his face up so that their eyes met again. There was still nervousness in her caramel orbs, but there was something else, anticipation. It was. "I mean, if you're okay with it." Despite her best efforts at making her voice strong, it came out quiet and meek. This was all very new, for the both of them. Except in the same way it made so much sense, acting on that instinct Naruto did the only thing that came to mind, he leaned forward swiftly and stole a kiss. It was hurried and uncoordinated, their lips only finding a comfortable rhythm after a few seconds, but both of them were suddenly lost to a whole new sensation of joy as they took that brief time exploring the other's mouth. They parted with panting breaths, smiles adorning both their faces and a thin trail of saliva running between their lips. They didn't waste much time breathing though before they launched back into each other's arms. Naruto moved with a bit too much force and ended up pushing Anko back a little, causing her to stumble. They found purchase again as she fell back onto the bed, Naruto on top of her as they continued their impromptu makeout session. Naruto pulled back again, gasping for air with a stupid grin on his face that Anko quickly got rid of as she flipped him over so she was on top again, capturing his lips with her own. She almost gave a small yelp of surprise when she felt a tentative, probing tongue lightly push against her top lip. After barely a moment of hesitation she allowed it entry and a whole new dynamic to kissing was found for both the teens. A veritable tongue war took place, each fighting for dominance as the moist muscles moved over and under one another, never staying in the same place for very long. Like their other kisses it couldn't last forever and they had to part, although Anko took the opportunity to lean back up, pulling her shirt over her head in one smooth motion. That day Naruto found out that Anko did not wear a bra under her shirt, or anything else for that matter. After a few awkward seconds of Naruto staring up at her exposed upper body which made the girl want to cover up out of sudden embarrassment, he seemed to catch on, shedding his own shirt as fast as he could. As quickly as it had stopped Anko fell back on top of him, enjoying the feeling of their now exposed skin rubbing against each other. Naruto wasn't sure where his sudden spurt of confidence came from, then again he was never really one to sit still and do nothing. Whither way he found his hand, that had previously been moving up and down Anko's exposed back, move around to her front, softly grasping her breast. A small moan of pleasure and encouragement was all the invitation he needed to start moving the hand in circular motions. Spurred on by Anko purring into his mouth, he brought the other hand around as well. Anko's hands weren't idle either, she had them running up and down Naruto's hardened abdomen, occasionally squeezing them shut as another jolt of pleasure would rush through her lithe form. Taking another burst of initiative, Naruto broke away from their heated kiss, much to Anko's evident disappointment. However, that expression was wiped away as Naruto began to tentatively kiss his way first down her chin, then to her neck. Doing his best to remember where she had been most ticklish when he had been drawing the seals, he began to lightly kiss her collarbone in places. Without him suppressing her, her moans of delight were much more vocal, making Naruto glad he had privacy seals in every room in the house. Eventually, though, his adventurous kissing went further south, finally finding his mouth over Anko's exposed and hardened nipple. When he first kissed it lightly, he could have sworn Anko hissed in pleasure, her back arching back as if trying to further the contact. However, when he lightly sucked on it, she nearly lost control then and there, her inexperienced body proving too sensitive to the amazing ministrations of Naruto's tongue. By the time he pulled away, she was breathing heavily, looking just about ready to drop onto Naruto's shoulder to rest. "Anko, if you want we can just stop there." His only reply was the sound of a zipper being pulled down so quickly it nearly snapped off. Two very sweaty and tired teens lay on an equally sweaty bed, the sheets rumpled and disorganized but at least covering the majority of their modesty. Anko sleepily lay her head on her new lover's chest, her hand gently running circles across his abdomen, a dreamy expression on her face even as she looked about ready to fall asleep. Naruto had his arm wrapped snugly around Anko's more petite form, a far-off look in his eye as he stared in no particular direction. That was incredible. He laughed slightly as Anko merely nodded her head, her hair tickling him as it brushed against his skin. However, after a moment of thought, she lazily raised her head, slipping over Naruto's form with the sheets still on top of her until she was straddling him again. Was incredible. A sly grin passed over her features as she leaned closer, her lips only a few inches from Naruto's. "Who said we were done?" Chapter 14, Same Old Life. Early in the morning in the Namikaze house, an alarm was heard ringing through every room. It didn't last long before there was the sound of metal flying through the air and the inevitable crash, halting the screeching alarm from further annoying a certain purple-haired kunoichi. Naruto cracked open an eye just as Anko resettled herself into the bed, placing her head on his chest as she normally did. With a small chuckle, the redhead shifted out from under her, replacing his body with a pillow quickly, much to the woman's disappointment. "Anko, what have I told you about destroying the alarm clocks? That's the 5th one this month." His response was a weary middle finger before the disgruntled woman flipped over, snuggling into the soft pillow once again. "Stop setting them for 5 and I might consider it." Naruto simply sighed. They had this conversation a lot, it was inevitable when they slept together. "We've been over this before, I need to get up early to do my morning patrol." Once again his response was nonverbal as Anko heatedly threw her pillow at him, knocking him slightly off balance as he attempted to pull on some pants. "Then get a quieter alarm." Naruto smirked as he walked over to her side. She petulantly flipped over again, but Naruto simply pulled her back over, quickly plating a loving kiss on her cheek. "Please, anything less than that and I would never be able to get out of bed with you." Caught off guard by the smooth answer, Anko could only stutter, giving Naruto an opportunity to plant another kiss, this time on her lips, and quickly jog into the bathroom. After a few minutes she regained her wits, blushing from the affectionate moment before flipping back over and attempting to return to sleep. As Nambu captain, early starts were expected from her boyfriend, but that didn't mean she had to sacrifice her mornings. Emerging from the shower with damp hair, Naruto smiled as he saw his sleeping girlfriend cutely drooling onto her pillow. Even under the covers he could make out her curvy yet lithe form. At 19 she had grown into an incredibly beautiful woman. Although he would never admit it himself, the same was true for Naruto. Finally reaching what would probably be his permanent height, he now stood at a decent 6 foot 3 inches with a trained and toned body and wild spiky hair falling about his face. Quickly pulling on his umbu gear, he gave Anko another kiss on the cheek, making her mumble his name in her sleep before darting out of the window onto an adjacent roof without a single whisper. He loved Konoha in the mornings. While dark it was peaceful, and if he timed it right he could sometimes catch a glimpse of the sunrise before he made it to the Hokage's office. Unfortunately today he was a little too early, but was content with hopping across the rooftops of the slowly waking village. Darting through a window of the Hokage Tower, he patiently waited for the secretary to alert the village's leader of his presence. After a few moments he pushed open the door to see Sarutobi already wrestling with the paperwork that had accumulated since the other night. He gave the older man a few moments to finish what it was he was writing, at which point he looked up with a kindly smile. "Tora, it's good to see you bright and early as usual." His voice was calm and friendly, but there was an underlying annoyance there. It was no small secret with anybody working close to the Hokage that he was not exactly a morning person. "Hokage-sama." Naruto's reply was curt and polite with a small inclination of his head, the epitome of a professional attitude. "Do you have any specific orders today?" Sarutobi nodded, rustling about with the various papers and documents on his desk with no real purpose, a clear sign he was about to breach a sensitive topic. "I think we need to discuss it again, Tora." At that the experienced Umbu captain visibly tensed, as did the 4 Umbu operatives hidden in the various shadows of the room. "Hokage-sama, with all due respect." Hiruzen quickly leveled a gaze at Naruto that brokered no argument. "No, Tora, I have been very patient with you, but you must understand that I only wish the best for all my shinobi, yourself included. 9 years in the Umbu, while certainly impressive, is highly unorthodox, not to mention unheard of." The masked redhead was growing more and more uncomfortable as the Hokage continued. "But Hokage-sama." Once again he was cut off by a single gaze that held all the age and power Hiruzen still had within him. "Tora, remove your mask." At that the entire room froze, the implications of the request known to everybody present. With a slightly shaking hand Naruto complied, showing his face to the Hokage for the first time in over 3 years. Sarutobi's gaze softened as he saw Naruto's uncovered face after so long. His soft purple eyes had gained some steel in them after so long within his profession, but they were still full of compassion, so like his mother's had been. The whisker marks that were once such a prominent part of his appearance had faded and thinned to the point you could miss them at a fleeting glance, only strengthening the resemblance to his father. "As of this moment I am hereby relieving you of your command in the Umbu Black Ops. You have the rest of the day to find a suitable replacement." Seeing Naruto raise a hand to interject, Hiruzen quickly cut him off. "This is non-negotiable." "Naruto." And just like that, any basis for arguments Naruto may have had died on the end of his tongue. The Hokage had addressed him by his name, as such his identity was compromised. He was no longer an Umbu. For a moment he stood there, masking his indecision with an emotionless mask of indifference. His hands nervously fumbled over his tiger mask, knowing that he would never be able to wear it again in an official manner. Finally he curtly nodded once, leaning forward and gently placing the porcelain mask on the desk. "As you wish, Hokage-sama." Hiruzen sighed at the blatant resignation in the young adult's voice. It truly hurt him to do this, but such tenure in the Umbu Black Ops was almost asking for mental issues to develop. "As of now you are a Jonin of the village. You will be expected to join the other prospective Jonin sensei at the end of this week to take a team. Until then you are off missions." Any further objections or questions Naruto may have had were silenced as Hiruzen returned to his paperwork, essentially dismissing the former Umbu captain. Dazed and slightly disbelieving that this wasn't all just a dream, Naruto exited the room, his feet naturally taking him in the direction of the Umbu offices. By the time he reached it his head had cleared enough that he could at least think straight. He knew there was nothing he could do at this point. The Hokage's word was law, and as a faithful and loyal Umbu, or at least ex-Umbu, he was expected to follow without question. Even so he still couldn't help the lost feeling that overcame him. His life was just right at the moment. He had his career, he was good at it, he had subordinates that trusted him and would gladly fight alongside him. He had the love of his life and longtime best friend by his side night and day. Right now though, he wasn't sure, he didn't know what to do with himself at this point. Hiruzen certainly had thrown a wrench in the works. However, the thing that shocked him most was the fact he was now going to have to take a team. He wasn't sure if he was ready for such a responsibility. Sure, he had to watch out for his fellow operatives on missions as their captain, but this was different. The people on his team wouldn't be trained and powerful shinobi that understood him and were ready for most situations. They would be rookie genin, barely out of the academy. He would actually have to teach them things, protect them. It was daunting. He was knocked out of his thoughts as he nearly walked into somebody in his distracted state, only his honed reflexes allowing him to quickly skirt around. He looked around, realizing he had walked into the headquarters without even realizing and made a move to walk towards his OFFI, what used to be his office. On the way he grabbed a random operative that was walking in the opposite direction. "Tenzo, I need you to go get Komaki, she'll probably be training with Tawa, have her come to my office as soon as possible." The brown-haired, lion-masked Umbu nodded absently before double-taking, only now looking up at his captain. "Taijo, you took your mask off." Naruto smiled sheepishly, rubbing the back of his head in an embarrassed manner. "Yeah, I can't explain right now, but don't worry, Komaki will explain it to everybody later." Tenzo nodded quickly, walking off to the training halls to do as he had been asked. Sighing, Naruto walked to his old office, hoping he wouldn't come across anybody else to avoid awkward explanations. He reached his room and collapsed into his comfortable rotating chair, holding a hand to his temple. He had to admit the Hokage had at least been patient with him up until now. It had been 2 years since he first brought up Naruto leaving the Umbu service. At the time Naruto had fended him off with statements about how he wanted to surpass his mother's mission record. He did that last year. Then he wanted to have the longest and most accomplished mission record of any Umbu member to date. He did that 3 months ago. After that it had been flimsy excuse after excuse, each growing weaker and less substantial than the last. In honesty, it was simply because being in the Umbu gave Naruto's life stability, although it also gave him an excuse for minimizing his interactions with the villagers. All his friends were in the Umbu Corp, he would still get to see them but not nearly as much. He didn't even know half of their names. He knew at least one person who definitely would not be happy with all this. He was pulled out for his introspective thoughts by a timid knock at the door. He knew it must be Komaki and couldn't blame her. Usually being called into a captain's office was for admonishment for a mistake, so no doubt she was out in the hall, going over what she could have possibly done wrong. "Come it, Komaki." Slowly the door opened, admitting a tall young woman with sandy blonde hair tied up with 6 large needles. She was dressed in the traditional Umbu uniform with a stylized cat-like mask with a few crescents descending down the forehead. She seemed slightly nervous, but other than that she held herself with the same bearing all Umbu were trained to adopt. Professional and alert. "You called for me, Taijo?" There was hesitance in her question, but definitely an underlying curiosity. It was a trait she'd had as long as Naruto had known her. "Just ask Komaki, it's okay." He saw her visibly lose the tension in her shoulders at seeing she wasn't about to be reprimanded for something. "Why aren't you wearing your mask, Taijo?" Naruto sighed before leaning forward onto his desk, chuckling slightly as he realized he wouldn't have to do the paperwork already stacked up to one side. At least there was one good thing to come out of this. "Because I am no longer a part of the Umbu Black Ops." To her credit, Komaki didn't even flinch. "As of today the Hokage has seen fit to relieve me of my command." He leaned forward even more, a slightly saddened smile on his features. "Which means that you are now the captain." He couldn't see it due to the mask, but Naruto was sure Komaki had just blinked in abject surprise. He stood as she started spluttering, trying to deny what he had just said. He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder as he began walking out of the room. "Congratulations, if you need any help just come and see me, alright? I remember how daunting it was when I first started out. Good luck with the paperwork." With that he briskly walked out of the office, leaving a remarkable shell-shocked Komaki in his wake. With that out of the way, he hopefully wouldn't have to deal with the inevitable questions from his subordinates for a while, or at least he hoped so. Now he just had to go home and tell Anko. He was sure that was going to be a lot of fun. Yes. It's about damn time. Naruto stared at Anko with his mouth agape, a large drop of sweat on the side of his forehead as he took in her excited little dance. He had just told her about being dropped from the corp and she had a slightly unexpected reaction. "Hey, what do you mean by that?" Anko stopped her excited jig for a moment, that huge smile still plastered across her features. Naruto had to admit he loved it when Anko smiled, genuinely, not that fake "I will kill you" smile she used on people who got on her nerves. It made her look radiant. "I've been waiting ages for you to get out of Umbu." She looked down quietly, her happy grin morphing into more of a sad smile. "I know you loved working in the Black Ops, but..." She looked away, red coloring her cheeks with embarrassment. Even after all this time she wasn't particularly good at expressing her feelings. "I feel like you never have time for me," sometimes your missions take you away for weeks at a time and I miss you. Naruto's face softened at that, his lips pulling up into a small smile as he wrapped his arms around his girlfriend in a comforting hug. Why didn't you say anything before? Anko shrugged meekly in his grip but snuggled further into his body anyway, enjoying the warmth his arms provided. Like I said, I could see you enjoyed it, it wasn't my place to take that away from you for something so selfish. Her out-of-character shy look was quickly replaced by a more usual expression of irritation as Naruto began chuckling, the vibrations from his chest traveling through her via their warm contact. What's so funny? I'm trying to be all emotional here. Naruto quietened down, wiping a non-existent tear from his eye. Anko, it isn't selfish for you to want us to spend more time together. He briefly pulled back from their embrace, a thoughtful look across his features. Well, okay, I guess it is, but in a good way. Sighing, Anko just leant back into his chest, once again shrugging non-committally. Doesn't matter now anyway, at least now I get to see more of you. She pulled back this time, a mischievous gleam in her eye and a playful smirk on her face. I think I like the sound of that actually. Naruto sighed but the smile on his face was unmistakable. Anko let out a small gasp as he swept her off her feet and into a bridal position before purring in delight as he carried her towards the bedroom. Good to see you have some initiative, Naruto-kun. A few days passed as Naruto adjusted to being out of the umbu. It was strange to say the least, especially getting used to not wearing his armor. He still wore the same black pants and vest over a simple mesh shirt, but he stopped wearing the shin and arm guards, instead opting to wear black boot-like sandals and dark gray fingerless gloves with metal plates on the back with the Konoha leaf etched on. Over all that he wore the traditional olive flak jacket, its pockets filled with various materials for sealing such as blank scrolls and ink. Finally he had his personalized tanto strapped to his back, going horizontal just above his waist. Right now he was stood outside of a classroom with the other prospective Jonin sensei, waiting for Iruka to finish up with a speech to the fresh genin. He looked around, noting that he didn't recognize many of his fellow Jonin, and by their curious looks towards him they didn't know him either. In fact, the only one he did recognize was Asuma Sarutobi, and that was more by reputation than from actually meeting the man. Hey, is this your first time as a sensei too? He turned to see a tall, raven-haired woman with startling red eyes wearing an unusual but accentuating dress. The redhead just rubbed the back of his head sheepishly, inwardly annoyed at being caught off guard. He put it up to nerves. Yeah, in fact I've only been a Jonin for a few days. The woman nodded absently and Naruto noticed that despite her cool demeanor she also seemed nervous about all this. Yeah, I passed the Jonin exams a few months ago and my friend Hana told me it was better to get a team early. Naruto raised an eyebrow at that, a smirk appearing on his face. You know Hana and Yazuka? She's a good friend of mine. The woman nodded, eyeing the redhead curiously but allowing the smallest of smiles to appear on her face. Any friend of Hana was alright in her book. I'm Kurenai Ui. Naruto smiled warmly, accepting the offered hand and shaking it firmly. Naruto Namikaze, Kurena's jaw nearly dropped off her face, but before she could react the Jonin were suddenly called into the room, Iruka having finished up with his speech. She couldn't believe she had been talking to Naruto Namikaze, youngest umbu captain in Konoha's history with the most accomplished mission record out of any active shinobi. She could only follow the rest of the Jonin into the room dumbly. Before straightening up, she didn't want to make a bad first impression on her team. Alright, in Team 7, your sensei will be, Iruka stared down at the clipboard, unknowingly reflecting the same shocked expression Kurenai had been wearing only a few seconds ago. Naruto Namikaze. A few murmurs traveled around the room. The last name was well known after all to the younger generation, the owner of the name, less so. Taking the initiative and deciding to treat this like any normal operation between shinobi, Naruto stepped forward with a placid smile, motioning for the three students who had stood up to follow him. Alright, Team 7, I will be your Jonin sensei for the foreseeable future, so follow me up to the roof. With that he vanished in a flash of red that had not only the students in the room surprised but the Jonin as well. After a few stunned moments the three called students hurried out of the room, much to the envy of some of their peers. Naruto himself reappeared a moment after he vanished, a thoughtful look on his face as he stared down at the three folders in his hands. He had gone over them last night when he had been called over to the Hokage's office, but he quickly removed the 3 attached photos, checking them over again. Sasuke Uchiha, Itachi's little brother. The cold and unwelcoming gaze of the stoic Uchiha stared back at him blankly, reminding him so much of how Itachi was when they first met. Sakura Harano. On the other hand, her photo seemed much livelier with a kind smile, although to the redhead's concern she didn't quite have the body he was expecting from a young kunoichi in training. And Ami Uzuki, Yojo's little sister if I'm not mistaken. The final of the trio was another girl with long purple hair that was almost a mirror of her elder sibling. Interesting matchup. After a few minutes of lounging against the railing, the 3 fresh genin finally joined him on the roof, disappointing him slightly with how long they took to get there. They didn't even seem to have run. If he was still in the Umbu, no, he had to stop thoughts like that. This wasn't the Umbu Corp and he wasn't dealing with trained, disciplined shinobi. Alright, as much as I'd like to say it's good to meet you all, that remains to be seen. At the confused looks of the 3 children in front of him, he continued quickly. You may think you are genin right now, that is not true. Quickly silencing the outburst from the pink-haired girl before she could even begin, Naruto leveled a calculating gaze on the trio. You are not genin until I say you are. The test you took in the academy was only to see if you had the skills to become shinobi. I need to test to see if you can actually put those skills to use. Thankful that the kids were actually listening right now instead of arguing, he gave a small smile that at least seemed to put Ami at ease. Don't worry too much about it, just use everything you've been taught at the academy and I'm sure you'll do fine. He conveniently left out the part where the tests only had a 1 in 3 chance of passing. With that said, meet me at training ground 18 in 5 minutes or you all fail. With a final grin that would have made Anko proud, he once again vanished in a flash of red. A split second later he watched from a nearby roof as the 3 fresh genin scrambled from their seats and rushed off in a particular direction. 4 minutes and 52 seconds later and Naruto was leaning against a tree, watching with amusement as his new team stood panting in front of him. Sasuke didn't seem too bad, but the 2 girls were visibly strained with sweat percolating on their foreheads. That alone worried Naruto. At their age he would have made it to the training ground not only faster, but neither he, nor either of his teammates, would have broken a sweat. Then again, he was an Umbu captain at their age as well. Alright, well you guys made it, you passed step 1. His was only met by 2 heated glares from the 2 girls and 1 look of irritation from the Uchiha, making him chuckle at the weak killer intent. Now then. He placed his hands in a well-practiced sign before a puff of smoke appeared next to him, quickly replaced by an exact duplicate of the smiling redhead. This is a shadow clone, not your normal clone, for one important reason. He placed a hand on the clone and pushed, knocking his other self off balance, much to the genin's amazement. Even Sasuke cocked an eyebrow. These are solid clones, able to interact and even use chakra to a certain extent. They have other uses, but that isn't important right now. What is important? He quickly slammed a fist into the clone's gut, making it wince in pain before dispersing in another cloud of smoke. Is that it only takes 1 good blow to destroy it? He smiled at the group again, intentionally taking it slow so that 3 could regain their breath slightly. Your job is to destroy 1 before 12 o'clock, which gives you 1 hour. To illustrate that point, he pulled a random stopwatch out of nowhere, quickly set the timer for an hour and dropped it on a nearby tree stump. You can use anything in your arsenal to accomplish this, but if you can't make that clone disappear in an hour, you all go back to the academy. Good luck. With that, he formed another clone before disappearing in a flash of red, leaving 3 shocked genin and a grinning clone behind. There was a moment of pause as the genin stared at the clone, who only idly looked back at them before everybody sprung into action. In flashes of movement that were almost painfully slow for the ex-Umbu captain, the 3 genin vanished into the surrounding bushes. Well, their hiding is okay. I'm sure any genin level opponent would have some difficulty finding them, although those 2's chakra signatures are fairly weak anyway. Feigning complete indifference to the genin's actions, Naruto casually walked over to a nearby tree, plopping down at its base before pulling out a scroll. The genin looked on in confusion from their hiding spots, wondering what their sensei, or at least the clone of him, was doing. Internally, Sasuke was seething. He hated that the man obviously didn't even think of him as a threat. Something else was bothering him as well. He couldn't place it, but his new sensei seemed awfully familiar. Tearing the thought from his mind, he stealthily began to make his way through the undergrowth, trying his best not to make a sound, which was an incredibly good effort. When he drew his kunai, he held his breath in tension, only to see that Naruto still wasn't the slightest bit concerned. His ego swelled slightly that his hiding skills were good enough to fool a Jonin. Before dropping down from his position, kunai poised to strike. He thrust down with as much power and speed as he could, feeling the cold steel meet resistance as he drove on anyway. However, he stood there, shocked to see that Naruto had defended against his surprise attack with nothing more than the end of his brush, the wooden handle apparently holding off the edge of his blade effortlessly. Taken off guard, he couldn't defend as his legs were suddenly swept out from under him in a flash of movement. Catching himself at the last moment, he pivoted on his hand and lashed out with his other foot, only for it too to be redirected with the end of the brush. Pushing back, he landed back on his feet, taking in the obviously amused expression of his sensei, who remained standing. I hope you aren't taking it easy on me just because I'm a clone." Sasuke saw the redhead's eyes drift about lazily, as if unconcerned by the genin's presence before his eyebrow raised. "Just you? Interesting." Sasuke quickly disregarded the strange comment before rushing back forward, intent on landing that one blow he need to pass and become a real genin. Naruto only sighed as he watched the moderately fast Uchiha approach him, brushing aside the kunai aimed for his throat with as little effort as he would need to swat a fly. "Don't underestimate me." Just like that, Sasuke's attacks doubled in intensity, his feet and hands becoming blurs to his two female teammates as they watched, both amazed and enamored. Naruto merely chuckled, taking his eye off of Sasuke to glance around casually, the ease with which he defended not decreasing in the slightest. "Oh, don't worry, I'm not, but this is good. If you don't come at me with the intent to kill, you'll never land that blow. Now if only dash." He smirked as he suddenly ducked low, allowing a surprised Ami to fly over his head, right into the path of the lone Uchiha, catching both completely by surprise. They landed back on the ground in a tangle of limbs, and by the time they both stood up and were ready to attack again, their sensei was gone. "Watch where you are going, Dobe." Ami looked back at Sasuke with wide eyes. She had only tried to help him by launching that sneak attack. But Sasuke dash, she was ignored as Sasuke turned from her, looking into the tree line of the training ground, trying to see where their sensei had gone. With that, he took off into the trees, intent on getting that blow so that he could finally start learning some techniques. His teacher was obviously very powerful, that much was obvious. He needed that power and nothing was going to stop him getting it. However, when he finally entered a clearing, he only saw Sakura lying unconscious in the middle of the ground. He didn't particularly care what happened to her, but she had obviously come into contact with Naruto. He jumped down and quickly shook her shoulders, trying to wake her up. She opened her eyes groggily before a mischievous glint alighted in her eyes. "Oops, you fell for my trap, Sasuke." The raven-haired Uchiha followed the pink's gaze down to the ground where his foot was inside a small loop of ninja wire. The moment his eyes widened in surprise, though the trap activated, and he was violently wrenched into the air, dangling upside down by one foot. He looked around, noticing as Sakura burst into smoke to reveal a hunged Naruto. "What did the original tell you? I can use chakra, remember?" With that, he mock saluted and dashed off into the trees, leaving a disgruntled Uchiha hanging from a tree. A few moments later, he found what he was looking for, Ami carefully making her way through the trees, her eyes scanning the path ahead as she held a kunai out on front of her. "Well, she at least seems prepared, but she hasn't spotted dash." He jumped backwards in surprise as a small barrage of shuriken suddenly sailed past the spot he had been in. However, as he landed back on another branch, it instantly collapsed under his weight, forcing him to tuck into a roll to prevent being dispelled. A few moments later, and he was aptly dodging a few clumsy swings of a kunai as Ami tried desperately to attack him. However, her combat skills were sorely lacking in comparison to the Uchiha. Finally, else it took up too much of the time he had, Naruto quickly sidestepped a weak lunge before grabbing the kunai out of her hand, spinning her around and pinning her to a nearby tree by her sleeve. "Nice try, almost got me there." With a cheeky wink, Naruto vanished again, leaving Ami to struggle against the weapon, keeping her pinned to the trunk of the tree. Okay, just one left. According to her file, she was Kunoichi of the year. She should put up a good fight. Finding her a few minutes later running through the forest floor, he smirked as a plan came to mind. Best grades in the year, huh? Let's see how she handles genjutsu then. It wasn't his strongest subject by any stretch of the imagination, but it was at least passable. You didn't grow up with two Sharingan users and not pick up at least a few tricks. Sakura quickly made her way through the trees, making her way in the direction she had last seen Sasuke heading in. She had already realized there was no chance of her ever landing that blow that would win them this test, so she was going to go and offer any help she could to Sasuke. She nearly shrieked though as she placed her foot down, only for it to suddenly melt into the ground. Her eyes widening in surprise, she tugged on the offending limb only for the ground to pull even harder. Soon her other leg began to descend and the bubblegum-haired girl began to panic. A few moments later and Naruto was standing over her unconscious body, her mind having shut down from the shock of being suffocated underground. He rubbed the back of his head sheepishly, a frown marring his features as he looked down at the girl. Well, that was unexpected. I thought for sure I toned down the genjutsu. Even as the words escaped his lips, a bell rang out through the forest, signaling the end of the test. Chapter 15, Same Old Dynamic. Well, that was, how can I put it? Naruto looked at his three fresh genin, and he used the term loosely, with an emotionless mask, despite the myriad of thoughts running through his mind. Two of them were tied to nearby trees while Sasuke sat rather solemnly between them, glaring at the man who he now thought would be sending him back to the academy. Ami and Sakura seemed likewise disappointed, but he couldn't tell if it was in themselves or something else. I had expected a lot more from you three. At that Ami looked up, some of the previous sadness gone, replaced by annoyance, a fairly common reaction in the face of defeat. How? You don't know anything about us? Naruto just gave a cold smile before pulling their three files out of seemingly nowhere, something that Anko often remarked he had a strange knack for. On the contrary, I know more about you than you think, but apparently not as much as I had guessed. I knew better than to blindly trust academy reports, but I still had at least somewhat high hopes for you three. He turned to Sasuke, who heatedly returned the other man's cool, indifferent gaze. You were supposed to be Rookie of the Year, yet when you attacked me you let your emotions get the better of you. Not only that, but you fell for a simple trap. You lacked the concern for your teammate to spot the simple inaccuracies in my henge. Sasuke looked away at that, grunting his disapproval, but he couldn't meet the older redhead's gaze anymore, so he turned to Sakura. Likewise, you were the Kunoichi of the Year with the best grades and you fell for a relatively simple genjutsu. You were concerned for your teammate, yet you let that cloud your judgment. He made sure to capture her gaze as he continued to speak so that the full force of his words were clear. In a real mission that would not only get you killed, but them as well. Like Sasuke before her, she looked away, obviously ashamed at her own performance. I honestly expected a lot better from you, especially considering who your parents are. The pinkette looked up at that, obvious confusion marring her features. You know my parents? Naruto raised a brow in confusion, a small smirk adorning his amused face. Of course, your old man was my father's main competition for the Hokage seat along with Orochimaru of the Sunin. The small grimace at having to say that man's name was lost on the three genin before him, obviously more concerned with their own problems. However, the meaning behind the words wasn't lost on any of them as they took in their sensei in a whole different light. You're the son of the fourth Hokage. Naruto nodded idly as he turned to the last of his three genin hopefuls. He was too used to the village treating differently due to his parents, he didn't need it from his potential students. And you are Yojo Izuki's sister, right? The purple-haired girl nodded timidly. She had already seen her two teammates get chewed out and was dreading her sensei's words already. You know Yojo ne? The redhead nodded again, this time a more melancholic smile on his face. Yojo was one of his best friends along with Hana and a few others in the Umbu. He had plenty of good memories with the purple-haired sword mistress. Of course, your sister was the one to properly teach me Kenjutsu, still can't beat her in a straight match. Ami smiled for a moment at the praise to her sister before Naruto's gaze became sterner. Yet I didn't see much of that in the way you performed. He looked at her confusedly for a moment. Don't you have a sword? Ami quickly shook her head, a sad look in her eyes as she refused to meet Naruto's gaze. They never taught it in the academy and, well, Yojone's always so busy with her work in the Umbu, I just don't want to disturb her. Naruto's gaze softened momentarily before it swept back around to take in the whole group. Well, in any case, your performance as a team was really poor. your individual skills are just barely passable as genin. Even if Sasuke's taijutsu is above average, there is no way I should pass you three. This time all three genin hung their heads in defeat, even the Uchiha, at least until Naruto sighed loudly enough to catch their attention and ran a hand through his mop of hair. Luckily for you guys, or maybe unfortunately, I see potential in all three of you. Their heads immediately perked up with hopeful expressions in their eyes, except for Sasuke, who seemed to have the emotional flexibility of a teaspoon. I expect you three to be here at this training ground at 8 in the morning. He stared at them intently for a moment. I dislike people who are late. He mumbled something else under his breath, but they missed it. However, the words Taijo and Sulk were fairly audible. With that he got up, gave them a friendly wave and turned around, at least until Sakura's shrill voice cut through the peaceful afternoon. Wait sensei, if you were going to pass us, why did you tie us to these trees? Naruto just gave another cheeky smile before vanishing in a bright flash of red, leaving three very confused and grumbling genin. Naruto couldn't help the slight sigh that escaped his lips as he slumped into a comfortable chair in his father's office. Then again, the room could barely be called that anymore, as the red-headed teen had long ago moved out most of his father's notes and effects, save for the flame-patterned haori hung on a wall hook and a few seal designs the Yondaomi had left half completed. Nowadays it was mostly filled with hurried sketches and scribbles from his younger self, along with a neat layer of dust that hadn't been so much as disturbed for a good few months. As he looked over the various sheets he had left strewn over the old wooden desk, Naruto slightly regretted that he had somewhat let his Fuinjutsu stagnate while in the Umbu. Absently he reached for the nearest sheet, almost coughing as he managed to send a small plume of dust floating into the air, which he quickly waved away. A small smile passed along his lips as he traced the small, intricate design that was only half complete. He was just reaching for a fine ink brush when a voice called out from the doorway. I remember that one, the Kunoichi seal, right? The redhead looked up to see Anko staring at him with a lopsided, bemused grin from the doorway. Yeah, I was going to update Jiraiya's pregnancy seal for Kunoichi out in the field. His was too tough to remove on short notice, even for someone who knew how to deactivate it. Anko chuckled, slinking across the room and wrapping her arms around the back of the chair and across Naruto's chest. Still is, you know. She lightly patted her side where underneath her tan skirt a small oval squiggle sat on her right hip. At that Naruto frowned, leaning back more on the chair to kiss his girlfriend on the neck before staring back at the half-finished seal. Why did I stop working on it? Anko's expression sobered at that as she slipped around the chair, nestling into his lap and leaning her back against the side of the desk. You left on short notice for a mission in the Land of Water. You didn't come back for 3 weeks. When you did, you threw yourself into training your taijutsu. I haven't seen you even come in here since then. Naruto's frown just deepened. He had lost a teammate on that mission, a recruit to the Umbu. His mask was still shiny and his uniform pressed and clean. It had been Naruto's job as the captain to watch over him and make sure he got back safe, but he wasn't fast enough. He couldn't be everywhere at once no matter how hard he tried. Maybe I should start working on it again. It wasn't really a question to be answered, but Anko chose to all the same, playfully slapping him on the chest. Never mind that though, how'd it go with the Gakis? At that, Naruto's frown twisted into a look of exasperation that only made Anko's grin wider and a little more towards that sadistic side that made her so infamous around the village. That bad, huh? Naruto just groaned as he ran a hand through his hair. I wouldn't call them bad, just. Ugh. His groans only made Anko snicker as she shuffled about on his lap, trying to get comfortable. Why couldn't I get genin that are more, you know? Anko raised an eyebrow, poking Naruto lightly in the forehead as he failed to come up with an answer. More like your team. Naruto didn't accept her accusation, but he didn't deny it either. I mean, come on, at their age I was leading people twice my age on A-ranked missions. Itachi had mastered his Sharingan beyond anything the Uchiha had seen since Madara, and Shisui had managed to master the Shunshin to the point he got a moniker because of it. Anko sighed thoughtfully, a rare expression on her usually playful features. Naruto, you can't have your expectations so high. When we were Genin, Konoha was still recovering from both the war and the Kyuubi attack. We were fast-tracked through our education and immediately thrown out into the field. These kids aren't us. I mean, come on. You've seen Kakashi. Child prodigies don't tend to come out the most well-adjusted of people. This time it was Naruto's turn to raise a bemused eyebrow. So I'm not well adjusted. Anko just snorted in that cute manner of hers, staring at the redhead incredulously. You mean beside that massive hero complex of yours, your obsession with your father and your innate fear of women? Naruto blinked and silence reigned in the small study for a few moments. I'm not afraid of women. At that Anko couldn't help it and burst out laughing, nearly falling off Naruto's lap in her exuberance. Even Naruto was sporting a grin. Oh please. I swear you still shudder every time we walk past that red-haired baker in the market street. Just what the hell did your mother do to you anyway? Naruto grumbled something under his breath before rounding on his girlfriend. Well, what about you? Anko managed to quickly gather herself together and look at Naruto with false superiority. What about me? I'm the picture of a well-adjusted kunoichi. To emphasize her point, she cupped her chin with both hands and gave Naruto a heartwarming smile. Luckily the redhead had years to grow an immunity to such tactics. What about that exhibitionist streak of yours? Anko blinked at that, looking down at the clothes she was wearing, which, admittedly, was just a sheer top and her underwear. I swear if I wasn't here to tone you down you'd be walking around in a mesh shirt and little else. Anko pouted and crossed her arms under her substantial bust, not exactly helping her point. I'm not that bad. Naruto snorted and poked her just above her heart, making her uncross her arms to bat his finger away. And you're obsessed with dango? At that Anko bristled, a vicious gleam entering her eye. You're obsessed with ramen. Naruto grinned and leaned in closer. You pick your teeth with senbon. Anko rose to the challenge, bringing her face so close their noses were almost touching. You don't know how to use a damn door? There was another pregnant pause as the two shinobi gazed balefully into each other's eyes, daring the other to say anything. Suddenly, and neither knew who instigated it afterwards, the two slammed their lips together aggressively as hands began to quickly wander across clothing, shucking it where possible. The chair groaned beneath them as they lost themselves in their passion. Almost an hour later and the two found themselves naked, sweaty, and panting atop the office desk, more than just dust having been disturbed during their bout of love-making, as Anko found when she peeled off a rather intricate seal drawing from where it had been stuck to her left ass cheek for the better part of the last half hour. Naruto was smiling happily next to her, an arm snaked around her waist while the other held his father's cloak across their lower halves, trying to conserve what modesty they had left. What were we talking about again? Anko chuckled humorously at the labored question. Naruto had after all been rather starved of oxygen for the past few minutes. Oh, you know, just how you have serious mommy issues while I'm just an all-round awesome person. She finished with a bright grin that only had Naruto flop his head back, chuckling breathlessly. Soon enough though he groaned and levered himself up onto his arms before turning and pulling himself up off the table. Anko made her dissatisfaction known when two slender arms snaked their way around his waist in an attempt to pull him back in. Come on Anko, I have to report to the Hokage that I passed my team. Anko murmured her dissent but let him go nevertheless, sighing as she got up, completely uncaring that she was completely naked, having let the Yondaime's Haori float uselessly to the ground. I suppose, you can't keep grumbling about how late Kakashi is all the time only to do it yourself. Naruto frowned as he went about collecting up his clothes, throwing Anko's bra out into the hallway in his own childish retribution for the comment. I don't always grumble about Kakashi. Anko simply chuckled as she slipped by him, making sure to press her assets against his chest as she did so and not even bothering to collect her clothes as she stalked off towards the shower. Sure, just add it to the list. Naruto simply sighed as he too moved out of the office, however it didn't take long before a smile snuck back onto his features. A few minutes later and Naruto was dressed and suitably freshened for a meeting with the Hokage. He had decided to take a more scenic route, so elected not to simply flash to a high-ration tag he had in the waiting room and actually left through his home's front door, if for no other reason than to prove to Anko that he could. However, not even 2 minutes out of his house and the young Jonin was forced to suddenly duck to one side, allowing a flash of steel to pass over his head with barely an inch of clearance, causing the air to hum menacingly. He quickly ran up a wall, drawing the tanto off his back that was standard issue for all Umbu in a flash to meet his assailant's next swing. Luckily she was a kunoichi, so he managed to overpower her, forcing her to flip back onto an adjacent roof, allowing her long purple hair to fan out distractingly. Normally in this situation Naruto would have immediately made some attempt to alert the village there was an infiltrator, but this time he simply sighed before running a hand through his hair, giving the kunoichi a moment to speak up. "Why didn't you tell me?" The redhead carefully slid the tanto back into its sheath on his lower back, hopping back down into the street as his attacker did the same. "Hello to you too, Yojao." The kunoichi removed the blue-marked cat mask she was wearing, revealing piercing black eyes and a sharp but petite nose. "Taijo." Naruto sighed, her clipped tone told him just how irritated she was. "I'm not your Taijo anymore, Yojao." Yojao simply clicked her tongue, stopping in the street and placing her hand on her hip. "That's funny, you never told me anything." Naruto suppressed another groan but couldn't stop his hand running through his hair. Today was just turning out to be a roller coaster for his mood. It was short notice, Hokage's orders, and you were out on a mission at the time. Yojao's eyes narrowed at that as she exhaled derisively. "And you couldn't have told me when I came back 2 days ago? I had to hear it from Hayate of all people, and he's not even in the corp." Naruto sighed and just kept walking down the street in the general direction of the Hokage Tower. "I've been busy, Hokage-sama made me a Jonin sensei." Yojao followed after him, arms crossed across her chest armor. "I know, Ami told me that she got the Naruto Namikaze for a sensei." At that Naruto had to chuckle, and even Yojao had to suppress a flicker of a grin at the corner of her lips. "She didn't even know who I was earlier today." Yojao shrugged and Naruto could see a little of the tension leave her shoulders. He had once been told he was a hard man to stay angry at, but then again that was Anko, and they had just had sex, so it may have been a biased argument. "What can I say, she's impressionable." Naruto looked away sheepishly at that, remembering how the two kunoichi on his team acted around Itachi's brother. "Yeah. I noticed." Yojao looked like she was about to comment when she suddenly looked up, noticing a hawk that began to circle over their position, calling her away to the Umbu headquarters. Quickly she replaced her mask and turned to leave, but not before suddenly flashing around, katana held up and at Naruto's neck, only held at bay by the tanto he had managed to bring up to deflect it. "We're not done here, Taijo, you better take good care of my sister or I'm coming for you." And with that she sheathed her weapon in one smooth motion before vanishing in the Leaf's trademark shunshin. Naruto continued walking on as if he hadn't just been threatened, but internally he was groaning, suddenly knowing how Kakashi felt every time he still called the man Taijo. Briefly he wondered if this was how Ansui-sensei had felt when he first took on him, Itachi and Shisui as a team, before unintentionally quoting the man under his breath. "Bothersome. Come on girls, just 5 more." Naruto watched with amusement as Sakura and Ami both doggedly forced their bodies to keep moving as they ran back and forth across the clearing. They were panting heavily and their arms had long ago lost their ability to move in any kind of coordination with their legs, but they were still going, so Naruto had to hand them that. There was also the small fact that every time they tried to walk Naruto just added on 5 more lengths. "Sensei, why are we just running?" Ami rasped out as she finally completed her set, instantly collapsing to the floor as she desperately tried to force air into her lungs and sate the burning in her limbs. A few moments later and Sakura joined her, a light sheen of sweat covering both their bodies. "Yeah, shouldn't we be doing team exercises or something?" Naruto let his body fall backwards only to hook his legs around the tree branch he had been sitting on and flip to his feet, a grin on his face as he watched both girls recover from the stamina workout he had both on. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and right now, in this team, it's you two. Ami winced at the brutally honest summation of their skills while Sakura couldn't find the energy to give a reaction, simply making a note to glare at her sensei as soon as she had control of her facial muscles again. "That's why Sasuke isn't doing the stamina exercises, he's already far ahead of you on that front." The redhead motioned with a sweeping gesture to the other side of the clearing where Sasuke was sparring against a shadow clone of Naruto. "But Sasuke-kun's the rookie of the year." Naruto simply cocked an eyebrow at that, noticing Ami seemed to have recovered enough to speak normally. It seemed she was the more physically fit of the two kunoichi. "So? Do you really think any shinobi you face will care about that? I'm going to bring you up to the same level as Sasuke so, as a team, you can support one another equally." The Jonin then quickly ran a hand through his hair and added, "Or so you can survive long enough to become Chunin." He smiled down at the girls before his eyebrow twitched as he heard Sasuke snort derisively from across the clearing. The look of irritation quickly turned to one of satisfaction as his clone managed a strong punch on the young Uchiha, making the dark-haired boy fold around his fist before being launched across the clearing. To his credit though, Sasuke managed to flip in the air and land somewhat steadily on the ground a few meters away. "You think something's funny, Sasuke?" The boy just scowled at his sensei, rubbing his stomach before settling back down into his taijutsu stance. However, to his surprise, the shadow clone in front of him suddenly burst into smoke without warning and a hand lightly fell across his shoulder. "I hope you weren't belittling my teaching methods." Sasuke leapt away in surprise as Naruto suddenly appeared from behind him in an instant. In his surprise at the man's speed, he nearly tripped over his feet. "Fast." Sasuke's eyes widened though when he turned around only to see a palm heading for his stomach. It was too fast for him to dodge, so he simply moved with it, leaning back to disperse most of the force. It still winded him though, but he stayed on his feet, glaring at where his teacher stood, the man not even bothering to enter a stance of any kind. "You know, Sasuke, when I first saw your profile and saw that I would be teaching Itachi's little brother." At the mention of that man's name, Sasuke's eyes narrowed dangerously, and for a second Naruto could have sworn he saw a flicker of red in those black orbs. "I thought you would be a lot like him." Sakura and Ami looked on in confusion from the side of the training ground, worried for the boy they both had a crush on but at the same time too tired to do anything. Sasuke on the other hand didn't want to hear any more and immediately charged the Junin, launching into a flurry of fast-paced taijutsu move the two girls struggled to keep up with. "But you know, Sasuke, I've known you for less than a day and I already know you're nothing like Itachi." He easily swatted aside a spinning kick, diverting the motion so Sasuke flew over his shoulder. Itachi wasn't as powerful as people made him out to be, but he knew how to use what he had and he perfected everything he knew. He grabbed Sasuke's punch in one hand, quickly catching the lead-up kick before spinning and throwing the boy clear across the clearing. He knew how to keep his head in the most stressful situations, never letting his emotions control him. At this point Naruto wasn't even sure Sasuke was listening as the boy flashed through hand seals that Naruto was all too familiar with. Fire release, Grand Fireball Jutsu. Sasuke exhaled an impressive sphere of flames that hurtled across the training ground, scorching the grass as it passed over. However, Naruto was no longer in its line of fire. Itachi was always aware of his environment. The sudden voice made Sasuke recoil away as Naruto once again appeared behind him, grabbing his shoulder and flipping him forward so he impacted painfully on his back. He tried to pick himself back up only to feel a sandaled foot press him back down, making cracks appear in the ground beneath him from the force. Suddenly the sun was blocked out as Naruto leaned over, making sure to lock eyes with the young Uchiha. "But Itachi was a traitor, don't become like your brother." Sasuke couldn't help but wince at the pressure on his chest but still managed to grind out between gritted teeth. "Who are you to tell me that?" For a moment Naruto's hair fell forward across his forehead protector, shadowing his eyes. "I was your brother's teammate." Sasuke's eyes widened as it suddenly all clicked into place. He remembered why Naruto's face was so familiar. When Itachi was still in the village, a red-headed boy would often come over to eat with them along with his cousin Shisui. Sasuke was still young at the time so he barely remembered, but he even recalled that same boy joining him and Itachi, playing ninja or practicing shuriken throwing. Tomato head. Suddenly Naruto's foot was hooked underneath Sasuke's side and with a fluid motion he flicked Sasuke back up onto his feet. "I hated that stupid nickname, Shisui would always laugh at me whenever you called me it." Sasuke just blinked as he processed the fact that his sensei was the very same boy that would go toe-to-toe with Itachi and sometimes even win. At this point Sakura and Ami had recovered enough to walk over, sensing that the fight was over. "Sensei." While Sakura had immediately gone over to see if Sasuke was okay, who was too shocked to shrug her off as usual, Ami just looked towards the Jonin in confusion. He simply smiled at her though, reaching across and ruffling her hair, much to her obvious annoyance. "Don't worry about it, me and Sasuke just had something to talk about, okay?" Ami looked uncertain, but once she looked across and saw the Uchiha looked back to his normal, sullen self, she nodded slowly. Naruto just gave her a bright smile and looked back around to the rest of his team, already feeling like he could actually do this now. "Alright. I think I've gathered quite a bit on you all today. All three genin blinked at that. All the two girls had done was run, and Sasuke had merely sparred with the Jonin without even causing the older teen to break a sweat. Sakura. The pink-haired girl jolted to attention at the firm, but warm voice, meeting her sensei's purple eyes quickly. You have an excellent grasp on chakra control, and you're obviously the type that prefers thinking before action. Normally I would say that would make you dead set for the cryptanalysis department, but to be honest I think that would be putting your potential to waste. You have the makings for an excellent genjutsu specialist or even a combat medic with the right training. Sakura seemed surprised by the frank assessment and more than a little pleased internally to be praised. However, immediately she felt a sense of foreboding come over her. I suck at all that fine control stuff, so until I can find someone to help you along that path I'll be working on your stamina and increasing your chakra reserves, considering that is where you're lacking at the moment. Sakura groaned and her shoulders slumped at the thought of more running, only to look up in confusion when a thought struck her. You got all that from just watching me run, sensei. However, Naruto simply grinned sadistically. Nope. Leaving the poor girl confused, Naruto turned to his next student. Sasuke, hearing his name, seemed to snap the boy out of whatever daze his revelations had put him in, and he quickly turned to the Jonin. It's fairly obvious your taijutsu and ninjutsu are both strong, with a lot of potential for future growth, but I wouldn't neglect genjutsu. A lot of Uchiha have become incredibly powerful from that art. Naruto gave Sasuke a meaningful look that was missed by the two kunoichi, and after a moment of silent staring, Sasuke begrudgingly nodded. For now I'll work you on those areas, but I'll also be working with you to unlock your Sharingan. As far as I'm concerned, you're behind. Sasuke scowled at that, but he couldn't exactly refute it. By his clan's standards he was somewhat of a late bloomer in that regard, which infuriated him to no end. Ami. Finally Naruto turned to the purple-haired girl who had been avoiding his gaze up until this point. Like Sakura, you are lacking in both stamina and chakra reserves, but you are more conditioned for physical combat than her, something that I will be helping you work on, being a specialty of mine. He grinned at the three genin, standing up straight and nodding appreciatively at them all, not seeing what they were now, but the team they could become. Right then, we'll head off to the mission desk and collect our first mission as Team 7, okay? At that, even Sasuke seemed to perk up as all three felt themselves fill with excitement at the prospect of their first real mission as a shinobi of the leaf. However, as Ami turned to follow her two teammates, she felt a hand on her shoulder holding her back. Curiously, she turned to look up at her sensei who, to her surprise, was holding out a long, thin katana. Here, I know what it feels like to stand in the shadow of your family, but the people you look up to are supposed to be surpassed. I'm not telling you to learn Kenjutsu, but you shouldn't rule it out just because your sister uses it. A shinobi has to use every advantage they have. Ami looked up at the red-haired teen for a long few moments before tentatively reaching out and accepting the blade. She had often held her sister's various swords, but they were always far too heavy for her. This one felt surprisingly light and just correct in her hand. Thank you, sensei. To her surprise and mortification, Ami felt a little blood rush to her cheeks as Naruto met her stuttered words with a kind smile. She immediately turned away and ran off after her teammates, clutching the long sword to her chest. Naruto just chuckled as he walked off after her, wondering what the first mission as Team 7 would be like. Chapter 16, Same Old Training. D-Rank. Naruto looked unquestioningly at the Hokage as the older man handed the red-haired Jonin 3 mission folders. He briefly glanced through their contents only for his confusion to grow. Painting fences? Manual labor at a farm? Catching a runaway cat? These weren't missions. These were chores you would get a neighborhood kid to do for a few ryo. Ah yes, I suppose you never would have come across these types of mission before, Naruto. I believe they were instigated a bit after your team became Chunin. Naruto just nodded absently. The first mission Ensui had ever taken them on was a C rank, and it was a real mission, not one of these odd jobs. However, he wasn't one to so overtly question the Hokage's orders, and if he said these missions were appropriate for newly instated genin, then, oh, who was he kidding? Seriously, Hokage-sama? These aren't missions. How could anybody ever rationalize using ninja, no matter how green, for such menial tasks? These kids should be getting experience, or at least exercises to hone their skills, not learning how to paint a fence. The Hokage remained quiet for a few moments, puffing on the pipe that now seemed to eternally rest in his mouth. "Could I talk with you for a few minutes, Naruto?" The Chunin to the Hokage's right, a man with a spiky ponytail and a horizontal scar across his nose, nearly spat out his coffee as he looked around at the village leader incredulously. "Hokage-sama?" "We still have Dash." He was silenced though as the aged Kage raised a wrinkled hand, cutting the Chunin off. "It's okay, Eureka, it will only take a moment." With that he slowly got to his feet before walking to the other side of the mission office, Naruto quickly on his heels. For a few moments he simply looked out the window, steadily blowing out puffs of gray smoke as his eyes followed various people going about their day. "Hokage-sama?" Naruto gazed at the older man curiously as he seemingly ignored him, almost as if he was lost in a memory. "Naruto?" The silence was broken so suddenly it nearly startled the newly instated Jonin. "Do you know what I feel every time I look out this window, down onto a peaceful and, dare I say it, happy village?" The redhead was slightly caught off guard by the question, but his own expression became thoughtful all the same, taking a moment to glance out at the same streets where the Hokage could obviously see something he was missing. "Pride." A short, rattling bark of a laugh was his answer as the aged Hokage's eyes crinkled into an amused smile. "Yes, Naruto, I do feel pride as I look out on the legacy of my mentors that I like to believe I have helped maintain. But more than that, I feel unease." Naruto blinked but didn't say anything to interrupt the man. "I feel unease because I know better. I know that this peace can only ever be temporary. Unfortunately I lack the optimism my own pupil displays for a better world." He turned around and for a moment Naruto caught a hint of true age in that man's dark, but still compassionate eyes. "I've seen too much, lived too long as a shinobi in the service of the village I love, to ever believe that this cycle of war and peace can be broken. I left that kind of idealism to my successor." He puffed out another smoke ring, watching as it floated toward the genin on the other side of the room. "We are different to them, Naruto. We are shinobi molded by hotter temperatures and higher pressures and, while those conditions may have created better blades, they also create ones much easier to break." Naruto stayed silent through all of this, not sure what to feel as the Hokage seemingly unloaded this onto him. The conflict of a Hokage is not one to picture. On one hand I wish more than anything that this village remain safe, and the people within remain happy, for that we need strong shinobi to protect us. On the other hand I do not wish away the childhood of those very same shinobi, I would rather them stay weak and blissfully innocent. The Hokage had a faraway look in his eye as he turned up to the Hokage monument, but after a moment of staring clarity returned and he tilted his head back towards Naruto with an easygoing smile. "What I am saying, Naruto, is that in these times of peace, allow the young ones to hold on to what innocence they have for what little time they can. We relics of war are still around to watch over them until it is their turn to accept that mantle from us and one day, surpass us." With that the man began to slowly move back across the room, but not before one last comment. "You know, my own sensei, the Daime, once told me that the only way to truly learn about ourselves is to teach others. It was why he made it a condition that all Hokages take on a student or a genin team before they can be considered as a candidate." Naruto's eyes widened at the subtle message the Hokage was trying to convey, but before he could say anything they were back and the older shinobi was settling back down into his chair, a small smile tweaking his features. "Now where were we? Ah yes, so what will it be, painting fences, farm work or catching Tora? Sensei, this is boring." Sakura blew her hair out from where it had fallen over her face. She was sweaty, damp, and dirty, not to mention covered in scratches from when they had to catch that demon of a cat. Right now she was wrist deep in the earth, pulling out various unidentifiable vegetables that may or may not have been trying to pull her back in. "Yes, Sakura, I heard you the first time, and the second, and the fifth." The pink-haired girl looked up to where her sensei sat in a nearby tree, seemingly doodling on a scroll and only keeping an occasional eye on his students. "Why aren't you helping anyway? Aren't we supposed to be a team?" Sasuke had previously stayed silent through the other so-called missions, but it was only so long before his sarcastic, sullen tone drifted over to the others. Naruto just smiled though, still not taking his eye off whatever it was he was writing or drawing. But the mission brief clearly asked for a team of genin for these tasks. I'm a jonin, you see. It's always important to stick to the mission parameters where possible, say so-chan. The dark-haired Uchiha merely narrowed his eyes at the irritating nickname his sensei had decided to give him. It reminded him far too much of his cousin Shisui. Sasuke recently decided he didn't like his cousin Shisui all that much anymore. But it is pretty dull, sensei, even training is more exciting than this. Finally the last member of their quartet spoke up, having just emerged from a large shed, definitely not smelling as fresh as when she woke up that morning. However, once again Naruto was quick on the return as he flicked his brush into the air flamboyantly before sliding off the tree branch. Much to the genin's chagrin though, when his feet touched the sodden, muddy ground they didn't so much as sink a centimeter in. But without them how would I teach you all these important lessons? With that he managed to get all three of his genin to glare at him as one. If that wasn't some team coordination he didn't know what was. What lessons? All we've been doing is stupid chores. Naruto tilted his head at the pinkette as if he was genuinely confused by her words. What are you talking about, Sakura? Didn't you learn a lot about your teammates as you tried to hunt down Tora? The girl looked about to retort when she blinked, her fist falling to her side as she stared at a random spot on the ground incredulously. And that brings me on to one of the most important things I can teach you as a young shinobi. He paused, making sure he had the attention of all his students before grinning. Everything is training. There was silence for a few moments save for what sounded like a crow cawing some distance away. That's it? That's your big revelation, that everything is training? Naruto just grinned, nodding his head sagely. I can never teach you something more important than that. While Sakura continued to look like she was in a confused daze, Ami spoke up in her stead. But what do you mean, sensei? How is picking vegetables or painting a fence training? She purposefully left out catching Tora. Anybody could see that was training of the most hellish kind. Simple, even now I'm training my chakra control by keeping my feet above the mud with the surface clinging exercise. You'd all be a lot less muddy if you just thought outside the box a little. Even painting the fence should have shown you how economic planning can save you both time and effort if you coordinate with your teammates. At that Sasuke looked down, his brow furrowing as if he had just realized something so obviously fundamental. This applies to everything. Naruto grinned again, glad his students were so easily accepting his first real lesson. Everything. Sasuke nodded slowly before looking down at the ground. He suddenly flashed through hand seals before exhaling a small, thin stream of fire along the ground in front of him, instantly hardening the mud at his feet. Immediately he took off along the ground, jabbing his hand into the earth every so often to snatch out a vegetable. Naruto grinned as he watched the young Uchiha go, glad the boy understood even if he was confused by the inefficient way he was doing it. Ah, sensei. The redhead blinked as he turned to see Ami standing rather close to him, alternating between looking over at Sasuke and down at his feet. What's the surface clinging exercise? Anko didn't even look up from her book when Naruto walked through the door at nearly midnight. Curled up on the couch she looked like a cat that had finally found a comfortable spot. She listened to him shuck his various trappings like the Jonin vest and his arm guards before finally speaking up, nearly causing him to jump in fright considering he hadn't even noticed her there. There was a reason Anko was one of the top infiltration specialists among the Jonin. If you're having an affair she better be damn sexy to warrant missing movie night. Naruto froze in place, halfway through pulling a metal-plated glove off as he looked back and forth between the couch where Anko's voice was coming from and the opened video box on the table in front of her. Crap. Anko snorted as she finally popped her head over the back of the couch, an amused yet slightly dangerous gleam in her eye as she took in Naruto's now rather nervous form. Crap is right, what's up? You're not usually this forgetful. Naruto groaned lightly as he slunk over to the couch, flopping down over the back of it so his legs were hanging over it limply and he was laying his head on Anko's lap. The kunoichi immediately took the opportunity to start running her fingers through his crimson locks like she had done as a kid, grinning as the spiky locks refused to be split for very long. This Jonin-sensei thing just keeps getting better, you know? Did you know they don't even teach the tree walking exercise at the academy now? Anko paused for a moment with her fingers wrapped around his hair before continuing on, her momentary surprise passing. Really? Weird. Naruto shrugged rather awkwardly in his odd position before sighing. Actually they might never have taught it. I learned it from Tosan and you learned it from me. I always assumes Shisui learned it from Itachi and well Itachi was. Anko nodded, a grim expression on her face at the mention of their rogue friend. He's Itachi. Naruto nodded lamely. It was never easy to broker the subject of the wayward Uchiha in the Namakazura household. The name alone was filled with such conflicting opinions. Well, in any case, now I have to go through and find everything that the academy didn't teach these kids and fill in their blanks. Who knows what other kind of basic knowledge has been left out of their education. Tonight alone I had them running up and down trees until they got the exercise down to a decent enough degree, and tomorrow I'm going to be having them move straight onto water walking. Anko just nodded absently, having lost herself in the spikes of Naruto's hair while he was talking. However, hearing that, a mischievous grin alighted on her lips. Ditching me for two little genin girls. Why, Naruto Namikaze, I had no idea you were a lolicon. Naruto looked up to see Anko with a hand on her heart and what seemed to be a genuinely hurt expression on her expertly schooled features. There was even a tear percolating in her eye, which was just unfair. I suppose you must consider me hideous with these bulbous, unsightly curves. She made sure to make an extra show of running her hands along her body, paying extra attention to her chest that was currently only concealed by an all-too-thin t-shirt. Of course Naruto wasn't one to be defeated so easily. He had lived with Anko too long for that. Of course, after all, what am I supposed to do with them, right? They aren't any good as handholds. Anko couldn't suppress the moan as Naruto suddenly flipped in place, straddling her waist and grabbing her breasts through her tight shirt, grinning as he kneaded them slowly. They just seem so heavy and useless. He lifted them up only to let them bounce back down onto Anko's chest and causing a shudder to run down the woman's spine. They don't even taste all that good. The last straw for Anko was when Naruto leaned down and with the touch of a pianist gently latched onto her nipple. She immediately grabbed his head, pulling him off her chest and up to her mouth, where she quickly slammed her lips against his. Naruto noticed she was a lot more forceful that night, so he let himself take the back burner, allowing his girlfriend to lead as she swirled her tongue around his mouth, greedy noises emerging from her own as she guided his hands back down to her chest. For just a moment she allowed them to separate, dry pants emerging from her moistened lips as a sadistic spark alighted in her eye. You missed movie night. Naruto simply grinned in response as his hands began to trail a lot lower than her chest. Well then, I guess I have some making up to do. His grin was met in kind as Anko suddenly turned the tables, flipping both of them off the couch so that she was the one on top, straddling his waist with her hands either side of his head. Damn right you do. Keep your guard up. Just because you think you might have your opponent off balance doesn't mean that they are. There are whole styles of taijutsu based around countering. Naruto lectured from his position above a mildly battered Ami. He had been training her and the other genin in their various styles, or in the case of the two girls, actually trying to mold their styles into something usable. It was fairly slow going at the moment, but he believed that once they got a grounding and some fundamentals knocked into them, they would progress a lot faster. Yeah, sensei. Ami simply seemed resigned to being thrown about the training ground by her teacher, and, looking over at Sasuke and Sakura, her teammates seemed to be getting the same treatment. Naruto could have had his genin sparring each other, but the problem with that was they were too far apart, skill-wise. Sasuke didn't know how to hold back, so putting him up against Ami and Sakura would have only lowered their confidence while frustrating him. While Ami and Sakura were of similar skill when it came to taijutsu, they were too similar. Neither would have improved at the same rate as if they had an opponent that would really push them. And so Naruto was filling in that role for each of them, using shadow clones that held back a great deal to push them, but not to the point they were truly straining to keep up. In Sasuke's case, he consistently made sure to highlight the gap between their skill levels. The boy seriously needed a dose of humility that Naruto was slowly but surely hammering into him. In the girl's case, he just pushed them as any slightly superior opponent would. He could tell after the first few days under his tutelage that they lacked confidence in their skill, something that could get not only them, but their squad mates killed out in the field. Now come on, draw your sword like I taught you. A smooth sword draw is half the fight between Kenjutsu users. Catching it on the sheath is just inviting your opponent to take advantage. Ami nodded tiredly again, bringing the long katana up to her side and positioning her hands and feet as she had been taught. While it was exciting for her to learn the art her sister spoke about with such passion, and looked forward to surprising her with it, it was a difficult and time-consuming style to learn. However, every moment she spent with her hands around the hilt of that sword she felt fulfilled, excited, even confident. Normally it was something that only a few weeks ago she had no trouble with, but after seeing the gap between her and Sasuke and truly understanding what that meant now she was out of the academy, her pride had taken a significant blow. Do you understand? Red flushed through her cheeks as she realized Naruto had been talking while she was lost in her thoughts and quickly imitated the stance he was showing her to the best of her ability. The red-headed Jonin looked over her with a critical eye, only inviting more pink into her blush as it looked like he was seeing right through her, analyzing every minute detail. Slowly he picked across her form, subtly adjusting various aspects like the bend of her elbow and the tightness with which she held the grip, until the stance felt comfortable and natural. Better, but you'll need to learn to recognize the slight flaws in your form before they become ingrained. When you practice, make sure what you are doing is comfortable and doesn't seem forced. As long as the movements flow, then you should be fine. He smiled lightly at that. The signal Ami could drop her stance, which was met with a thankful sigh. While the katana felt light at first, it quickly became heavy after holding it up like that. You know, your sister once likened Kenjutsu to a dance. It's all about reading the flow of your opponent and matching it. So Naruto winced slightly as a loud voice suddenly called across the clearing. Yo, what's up Team 7? Long time no see, eh? The redhead looked over along with his genin as another genin team walked into the training ground. The one who spoke was a rather excited-looking boy with spiky brown hair and a small puppy riding in the nape of his jacket, an Inuzuka then. What are you doing here, Kibabaka? The Inuzuka, identified by the red triangular marks resembling fangs on his cheeks, gained a small tick over his eye as he looked over to where Sakura had shouted at him from. However, it was his teammate, a quiet boy wearing high-collared gray jacket and similarly spiky brown hair, that spoke up for him, likely an Aburame given the dark sunglasses he wore. Why? Because we came to train, of course. It is only logical considering we are in a training ground, yes. Oh yeah, definitely an Aburame. The style of speech was unmistakable. Appropriately enough, the little group of clan children seemed to be rounded out by a young Hyuga girl. The pale white eyes couldn't have been anything else. There was also the rather emotionless exterior she exuded, which matched the Eri clan to a T. Other than that, she rather reminded Naruto of the woman his mother had been quite friendly with, Hayashi's wife. Ah, sorry, I didn't realize that another team would be using. Oh, it's Unamikaze-san. Finally the redhead's gaze drifted over to the Jonin sensei of the team, that same woman he had met when he had first been assigned his team. Oh, Kurenye-san, Naruto is fine. He looked back across at the assembled genin and smiled. So you team came to train, did they? How about a few sparring matches? It'd be nice to know where my team is in the grand scheme of their year. Kurenai seemed thoughtful at the suggestion before finally acquiescing. A few minutes later and everybody other than Sasuke and Shino was lined up on the edge of the clearing with the two aforementioned genin facing one another at the center. Both genin were quiet all the way up until the point Naruto blew through his fingers, sounding off a loud whistle that marked the start of their match. Immediately both flew into action, Shino releasing a loud cloud of insects around his form while Sasuke pivoted his foot, vanishing before the genin's eyes in a burst of speed that even surprised Kurenai. Whoa, Sasuke got a lot faster. What they didn't know was that Sasuke was simply using the surface clinging technique to provide extra grip and his newly found chakra control to marginally enhance his muscles. He had been honing it over the past few weeks of deranked missions, using Naruto's advice of taking everything as training to use almost everything thrown at him as a challenge. However, not knowing this, the others in Kurenye's squad could only nod at Kiba's exclamation. A few minutes later and it was over. Shino subverted Sasuke a few times with his insect clones, but Uchiha proved too fast and quickly bested Shino where he was worst, in taijutsu. The fight was painfully one-sided and Kurenai seemed a little down that one of her more powerful genin was so easily beaten. Naruto on the other hand was rather proud of Sasuke. In a truly Naruto style, he had used speed as an overwhelming force without going so far as to humiliate his opponent. The boy was getting better at using the appropriate amount of force for the situation he was in. Maybe those D-ranks had some worth after all. He quickly turned his attention back to the field though as Kiba and Ami walked out together only to feel a tug on his sleeve from Kurenai. Are you sure about this matchup, Nami, Naruto? Kiba was one of the more powerful graduates this year and Ami was, well. Naruto raised an amused eyebrow as he turned back to the field where the two genin were squaring up to one another. The dead last. Kurenai just nodded lamely while Naruto chuckled. Don't worry about it too much, Kurenai-san, Ami has progressed a lot since then. He was about to turn his full focus to the match when he caught Kurenai mumble something to his side. Sorry, what? The woman's eyes widened as she realized she had been heard. Ah, Kurenai, you should call me Kurenai if you're letting me call you Naruto. The redhead tilted his head slightly before grinning, causing the vaguest hints of pink to creep up on Kurenai's features. Sure, Kurenai. With that he turned back to the match that was just about to start, not noticing Kurenai turn her head away to hide the faintest of blushes. Out on the field he could easily hear Kiba complaining about the matchup. Come on, why'd I have to get the dead last? Ami's eye twitched at that as she slowly drew the katana by her side, holding it up as she had been taught. I'm a different person than the one you graduated with, Kiba Baka. The Inyazuka simply snorted though, settling into a lazy stance that just showed he wasn't taking her seriously. Ah please, so you got a sword? Big hoop, I won't even need Akamaru to beat you. With that said, the little white dog in his jacket bounced out of his clothes and scampered off to the sidelines where Kurenai picked him up. From the sidelines Naruto looked across at Kurenai amusedly only to see the woman with her face in her hands. However, he turned back as Ami suddenly shot forward, hoping to catch Kiba off guard with a sudden burst of speed. She managed it, but only for a moment before Kiba used his superior reflexes to narrowly move to the side. His eyes widened in surprise. Damn, first Sasuke and now you, what's that guy giving you to make you guys so fast? Ami grinned from where she had back off to, weary of counterattacks from the genin. You shouldn't be so surprised, Naruto-sensei is the fastest man alive after all. This time it was Naruto's turn to look sheepish as both Kurenai's and his team turned to look at him, making him wave awkwardly. He never remembered telling his team anything of the sort. Kiba was quick to recover though as he suddenly dashed forward, easily matching Ami as they engaged in a flurry of taijutsu and kenjutsu. It was quite clear Kiba was the superior fighter, but with the reach offered by her sword Ami was at least able to stave him off as she backpedaled. However, even that began to work against her as the young Inyazuka began to use his clawed nails to divert the sword, throwing the girl off balance. However, all the retreating turned out to be a ploy as Ami suddenly grinned, closing her eyes as she revealed a tag underneath her foot back where she had started the match. Instantly Kiba was blinded as the tag lit up and released a flash of bright white light, making the poor boy yelp in pain and clutch his sensitive eyes. Immediately Ami took advantage, skirting around the boy and striking at him with the blunt of her sword. In his disorientated state Kiba could only wildly swing out where he smelled the girl, his eyes still screwed shut. It was quickly over though when Kiba suddenly ducked low, sweeping out with a low kick that took away Ami's grounding and left her staring up at the sky with the wind knocked out of her. Kiba pounced like a predator, quickly getting Ami into a position where she was forced to sumbit or have her arm dislocated, ending the match. However, as the purple-haired girl walked off the field, the disappointment she was expecting from her sensei was absent. Instead, the older teen grinned at her, ruffling her hair affectionately. That was great, Ami, good use of your surroundings. Despite the irritating ruffling of hair that she was now going to have to fix, Ami felt herself flush with pride as she turned around to watch the final match, Sakura vs Hinata. Unfortunately, it was almost over by the time she turned. Despite her increased speed thanks to Naruto's training, Sakura was unprepared for the brutal assault from Hinata's Gyuken. In mere seconds the girl had half her body disabled and Hinata was already striding off the field, her face a mask of impassivity. To side both Naruto and Kurenai were frowning. It had been an obscene overuse of force against an inferior opponent. Naruto had hoped to show Sakura how powerful a serious kunoichi should be at her age by pairing her with the Hyuga, but this might very well shatter her already shaky confidence in her skills. Well, I suppose I should get Sakura over to the hospital then. The redhead picked the now immobilized girl up gently in his arms, wincing as she groaned at the contact. It had just been unnecessarily brutal. Wait, Naruto. He turned back to see Kurenai still standing there as her team walked off. Kiba arrogantly consoling Shino on his loss as Hinata walked a few steps behind. I was thinking, as we're all new Jonin-sensei, that you, me and Asuma could get together, talk about the teams, see if we're missing anything. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the suggestion before nodding with a shrug. Sure, how about at the Dangoya tonight? I need to get Sakura to the hospital. He jiggled the girl in his arms only to get a groan in response, "So if you get Asuma I'll see you there." Kurenai smiled brightly at that, nodding before she blinked as she replayed his words. "The Dangoya? You like Dango?" Naruto just grinned as he began to walk off, making sure not to jostle the genin in his arms. "Let's just say I've had to acquire a taste for the stuff." He paused though, a frown on his face as he turned back to the female jonin, the previous mirth gone from his features. "If I might ask though, what's up with that girl? The way she acted in that match." He left it there but Kurenai understood all the same, her expression saddening as she looked off in the direction her team had left by. "Please don't hold it against Hinata, she used to be such a sweet and caring girl." Suddenly that sad expression turned into one of quiet rage as her delicate lips twisted into a scowl. Of course the Hyuga quickly saw to that. However the rage quickly fled, leaving her looking a little helpless and tired. I think the final straw for her was having to fight her own sister just so she wouldn't have the caged bird seal. The raven-haired woman began to walk off to follow after her team with only a final remark. Her dream was once to unite the branch and main houses of the Hyuga, that was the kind of person she was. Hayashi just made her realize that she couldn't do that with that damn seal on her head, she's never been the same. With that she disappeared into the tree line, leaving a contemplative Naruto behind. "That's horrible." The redhead quirked an eyebrow, turning to find Ami and Sasuke standing behind him. It was the violet that had spoken up but even Sasuke seemed a little disgusted. Naruto just sighed on the other hand, he knew all too well the mess that was clan politics. That's what it is to belong to a clan, I'm afraid. And with those tired words he led his team off to the hospital. Sasuke walked behind them, a frown of his own adorning his usually sullen features. That's it for part 4. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.